It is early to handicap the Democratic presidential primary, but the arrival of the first quarterly fundraising filings this week does show some of who is breaking out in the Democratic field. Among the top 5 are large hauls from Warren, O'Rourke, and the newcomer Buttigieg, and then huge numbers for 2 senators, Harris and Sanders, with $12 and $18 million. Sanders not only first, but his edge among small donors provides a cash flow that could make him the best-funded candidate throughout the race, about 900,000 individual donations of about $20 each. Sanders is out on offense this week, releasing his tax returns and becoming the first candidate to do a Fox News town hall where the audience was polled on his Medicare proposal.
This audience has a lot of Democrats in it. It has Republicans, independents, Democratic socialists, conservatives. I want to ask the audience a question. If you could raise your hand here, a show of hands of how many people get their insurance from work, private insurance right now. How many get it from private insurance? Okay, now of those, how many are willing to transition to what the senator says, a government-run system?
Some cheers and whoever was there in the room. Sanders also sparring with those Fox News hosts over his policies, including a proposed wealth tax.
Would you be willing to pay 52% on the money that you made?
Also,
you can volunteer. You can send a check.
Oh, you can volunteer, too. We have a...
But you suggested that that's what everybody in your bracket should do.
And Martha, why don't you give? You make more money than I do.
Well,
why don't you give?
I didn't suggest a wealth tax.
And she's not running for president.
All right, but we're going to fight for a wealth tax.
Sanders spent most of his career outside of the Democratic Party, and it is beginning to dawn on some party leaders that he can win. The New York Times depicting a, quote, growing alarm among some Democrats about a, quote, 70-something candidate from outside the party structure, immune to intimidation or incentive, with an unwavering base. It also quotes a centrist Clinton insider, Howard Wolfson, saying, people underestimate the possibility of Sanders becoming the nominee at their own peril. What does the Sanders campaign think about this new Times piece? Well, they're already fundraising off it, with Sanders' campaign manager emailing supporters, quote, the Democratic establishment's terrified of our movement, as they should be. Now, at this early stage in the race, most polls, I can tell you, are useless. They really show only name recognition. But many believe that fundraising should not decide who the nominee is, and that makes sense. But what you see on your screen does show who some grassroots activists are leaning towards and who will obviously have the funds to compete in a long race. By that metric, Harris and Sanders are potentially emerging in a kind of a class by themselves, and the New York Times reporting Sanders' breakaway success does have Democrats nervous, while others argue if the top candidates are embracing similar policies, higher taxes to fund Medicare, a working minimum wage, free college, then why should the Democratic Party be afraid of Bernie Sanders anyway? Joining me now to get into the big political fight that is animating Washington tonight, Leo Wright-Rigueur, professor at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, and Adam Green, Democratic strategist and founder of the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, which has pushed the Democratic Party on economic and other issues. Thanks to both of you for joining me.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to have both of you. Professor, what do you think of the way this is going down, and a Times article that clearly is tapping into energy on both sides of Bernie right now?
So, you know, to be sure, is to be expected. I mean, Bernie Sanders was incredibly popular the last time around, 2016. He's maintained that momentum. His, supporters represent an important part of the party, a part that is necessary in order to win in 2020. But really what we're seeing play out is the kind of ideological differences amongst the various wings of the party. So it's necessary to do it now. It's necessary to do it in detailed fashion, because this is the kind of thing that is going to determine what goes into 2020, what goes into the general election, and really who is strong enough to go up against Trump. And realistically, that's what the base cares about. They care about who is the candidate who is strong enough to beat Trump. It's not about ideology. It's not about, necessarily name recognition, although that is important. But it's about, who has the capacity to beat Donald Trump in the long term and in the long game.
Adam?
Yeah, well, I agree with that last point. I am one of many people who supports Elizabeth Warren, thinking that she is the most electable Democrat we could nominate. But I will just say, it's clear that Bernie Sanders is the frontrunner at this point, and he absolutely crushed it last night on Fox. I think part of the reason that he's able to exceed expectations so much is that we have a rather broken conventional wisdom here in D.C. that basically doesn't understand that bold, transformational ideas like Medicare for All are super popular with Republican, independent, and Democratic voters. It's less about left versus right and more about, the bottom versus the elites at the top. And last night, one of the most compelling moments for me was when Bernie Sanders named the villains, and he named the insurance companies and Big Pharma, but also the Republican establishment and the Democratic establishment. And guess what? None of those people were popular with that crowd.
Well, you say that, Adam, and Sanders and Warren are clearly two people with a record of these kind of progressive economic achievements at a time when you're up against this Trump juggernaut in the Democratic Party. When you look at that and then you look at what Sanders is doing, which is clearly right now, even as people perceive him as the front runner, we just showed why he has so much money and support on the financial side. He's not leaning into being the Democratic Party frontrunner, right? He's leaning in, and I'm going to read from this email tonight from Faz, his campaign manager, who I think you know from progressive circles, saying, look, the Democratic establishment and high-dollar donors are planning how to stop our campaign. They're terrified of our movement, as they should be. What do you think of what that message is, and that's different from Warren and most other Democrats who might be similar ideologically?
Well, first of all, I do think that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are in a class unto themselves when it comes to truly bold, transformational, structural ideas. But I don't think it's a bad political strategy at all to bash the Democratic establishment. We have 1 million members at the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, which I'm co-founder of, and look, they don't love the Democratic establishment. Not many people love the establishment, period.
Right.
So it's possible to both appeal to voters but not appeal to the establishment.
I think that gets overwhelmed sometimes by some of the other debates among the candidates. Trump clearly showed the antipathy towards Republican establishment figures, Professor. I think what Adam's gesturing to, and clearly what the Sanders folks are betting on, is that there is some of that on the left as well.
Right, and so there is a notion that Bernie Sanders and to some extent I think Elizabeth Warren and a few of the other candidates are running as outsiders. They are running as anti-establishment characters and candidates, and we saw some similar things not just with Trump but also with Barack Obama in 2008, where he essentially ran as an outsider candidate, as the candidate who was going to hold Washington accountable, the candidate who had voted against the Iraq war, the war in Iraq. So we see a lot of these kind of resurgent and really pivotal in this moment. At the same time, we also know that the runner, the person who's been unnamed here, is the person who hasn't yet declared, and that's Joe Biden. So there are a lot of reasons why there might be support around Joe Biden in this moment, including the fact that there is a pretty large, centrist wing or moderate wing of the Democratic Party that supports someone like Biden.
No,
so that's going to
right.
be interesting to play out over time.
I see you guys disagreeing, which we will leave as a pending disagreement for next time, because we welcome all views here, and that's the question of whether Biden is a phantom menace or a front runner in waiting, I think, is a big one.